Welcome to Talk Treatises.
It's good to be back.
Today we're doing something a little different. Usually we take a look at the world around us, politics, tech, culture, and we try to make sense of all the noise. We grab a stack of articles, we look at the latest manifesto from Silicon Valley or Washington, and we try to parse it.
Right.
But today we're turning the lens inward. We are looking at a text that essentially demands we rewrite the entire operating system of how we think, how we talk, and how we understand the very concept of truth.
It's a fascinating piece of work. And I think different is maybe a bit of an understatement. I might even use the word dangerous.
Dangerous? How so?
Yes. Because this isn't some casual guide to public speaking. It's not a how-to manual for, starting a discussion group or winning a debate at the Thanksgiving table.
Right.
It is a rigorous, almost militant manifesto on the very nature of intellectual engagement. We're looking at a work that sets a benchmark for discourse that is, frankly, significantly higher than what most of us encounter in our daily lives. In fact, it suggests that most of what we call thinking isn't really thinking at all.
That is a heavy opening. So we're calling this the Treatise on Rigorous Discourse. And the first thing that just jumps out at you when you read this text is the sheer ambition of it. It doesn't just ask you to be smart, it demands a specific kind of intelligence. It's almost intimidating. I mean, I read the first few pages and I felt like I was being scolded for basically every conversation I've had in the last 10 years.
It definitely has that effect. It's a mirror. And when you look into it, you realize how much of our daily communication is just...
well, it's performative.
The text opens by establishing this persona, an ideal archetype of the philosopher.
Yeah.
And it explicitly mentions a metric that made me just stop cold.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
It says IQ plus 3 standard deviations.
Okay, let's stop right there. Because when I saw that, my immediate reaction was, okay, this is just elitist garbage. It feels like gatekeeping.
Of course.
It feels like it's saying, if you aren't a certified genius, put the book down and go back to, I don't know, watching reality TV. Is that what the author's actually saying here?
It's the obvious interpretation, I think, but I also think it's the wrong one, or at least it's the shallow one. If we look closer at the text, that phrase, IQ plus 3 standard deviations, it isn't really functioning as a barrier to entry based on some test score.
Okay.
It's shorthand. It's more like a metaphor for a very specific cognitive capability.
Explain that, because to me, it sounds like raw processing power, math skills, that kind of thing.
Well, think about it this way. What happens when two people disagree on politics? Usually person A says their piece, and person B, they aren't even listening.
No, they're just reloading.
Exactly. Their brain is in defense mode. They aren't listening. They are reloading their next argument.
Guilty. I mean, I do that all the time.
We all do. It's human nature. Now, the type of intelligence this text is describing, this plus 3 SD benchmark, it's the ability to suspend that reflex entirely. It's the ability to hold two completely contradictory ideas in your head. Let's say a libertarian argument for free markets and a socialist argument for state control, and to just strictly analyze the architecture of both arguments without panicking, without getting angry, and crucially, without trying to resolve the tension immediately.
So it's not about how fast you can do calculus, it's about how much cognitive dissonance you can tolerate.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. It's about emotional and intellectual bandwidth. The text describes a person who can entertain a thought without accepting it. And that requires a level of mental separation that, frankly, most people find exhausting.
It is exhausting. It's so much easier to just pick a team.
And that's exactly the intellectual problem this work is trying to solve. The text argues that we live in a world of summaries. We read the Wikipedia page, we read the tweet thread, we watch the 3-minute explainer video.
And we think we know the philosophy.
And we think we know it. This work just says, no, you don't know anything until you've grappled with the structure.
The text seems to be waging a war against what it calls the bumper sticker version of ideas.
It calls it the shallowing of discourse.
Which feels incredibly relevant right now. I mean, if you look at the historical context that's implied here, while the text reads like a classic, it's so clearly written against the backdrop of the information age. We are drowning in data, but we are starving for context.
We are. And the text implies a world where, and this is a quote, most people know the bumper sticker version of a classic philosopher's ideas. It's responding to the Wikipediaification of all knowledge.
The undergraduate summary style of learning.
Exactly that. You know the drill. You take a generic philosophy 101 class where you watch a YouTube video and you learn Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, and that means mind-body dualism.
Right.
And then you move on. You check the box. Okay, I know Descartes.
Yeah, Nietzsche's the God is dead guy. Machiavelli is the evil politician guy. We label them.
And this text screams against that. It argues that that kind of knowledge is actually worse than ignorance.
Worse. How can knowing something, even a little bit, be worse than knowing nothing at all?
Because it gives you the illusion of competence. If you know nothing, you might be curious enough to ask a question. But if you know the bumper sticker, you think you have the answer. So you stop looking.
You stop digging.
You stop digging. The problem the author is trying to solve is that when everything is a soundbite, nuance dies. And when nuance dies, political philosophy, which is really just the study of how we should all live together, it becomes impossible. They just become shouting slogans at each other.
It's the difference between knowing the ingredients of a cake and actually knowing how to bake it.
That's a perfect analogy.
The text seems to be saying that we have a generation of people who have memorized the ingredient lists of history's great ideas, liberty, equality, justice, but they have no idea how to actually cook with them. They don't know how those ingredients react to heat or how they bind together.
A perfect analogy. And the text offers a solution. It's not just a critique, it's a manual for repair. If I had to boil this entire work down to a single one-sentence thesis, it would be this. Intellectual discourse requires a synthesis of historical context, logical structure, and wit, prioritizing the through lines of an argument over the linear repetition of its chapters.
Through lines over linear repetition. That's a key phrase. I think we need to unpack that.
It demands that we stop reading line by line and start thinking thought by thought.
Okay, let's circle back to this persona for a second, this ideal discusser. We talked about the intelligence aspect, the +3 SD, but the text adds some flavor to it. It doesn't want a robot. It implies the speaker should be intelligent and witty and engage in playful banter.
Yes. And this is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, really difficult.
Why difficult? I mean, everyone likes banter.
Everyone likes easy banter. But the text asks for playful banter while treating serious topics with poise and solemnity.
Think about how hard that is to pull off.
Usually, if you are being solemn, you are boring. If you are being playful, you are trivializing the subject.
Right. It's the difference between a comedian and a funeral director. You rarely see them in the same room, for good reason.
And the text argues that the highest form of intellect is the ability to be both at once. It's the philosopher at a dinner party archetype.
Okay.
Not the drunk uncle ranting about the government, and not the shy academic who's just quoting footnotes all night. It's someone who can hold court, who can make you laugh, but who can also, dismantle your entire worldview between the appetizer and the main course without ever raising their voice.
It's James Bond meets Socrates.
In a way, yes. It requires a certain coolness, a detachment. If you're too emotionally invested, you lose the poise. If you don't care at all, you lose the solemnity.
So you have to care deeply about the truth, but not care at all about being right.
That's it. That distinction, caring about the truth versus caring about being right, that feels central to this whole thing. And it leads us to maybe the most radical rule in this entire text. I mean, I honestly did a double take when I read this part.
I think I know what you're talking about, the sources.
The sources. The text explicitly says, you do not reference provided sources directly. And then you never talk about specific source names.
It is radical. In the academic world, that is heresy.
It's worse than heresy. It's plagiarism, or at least that's how we're all trained to see it.
Exactly. If I write a paper and I don't cite my sources, I get an F. If I go on a stage and present an idea as mine when it belongs to John Locke, I'm a fraud. So why does this text, which claims to be about rigor, demand that we hide our sources?
Because citations are often a crutch. And worse, they are a weapon.
A weapon? What do you mean?
Think about the last time you saw a debate, online or on TV. Someone makes a point, and the other person says, well, actually, a study from Harvard in 2019 says, or as Orwell wrote in 1984, what are they doing in that moment?
They're backing up their point with evidence.
Are they? Or are they just shutting down the conversation?
Right.
They're using an appeal to authority.
Right.
They're saying, I have a big fancy name on my side, so I win. If I quote Aristotle on the nature of virtue, you're likely to just nod your head and accept it because, well, it's Aristotle. Who are you to argue with Aristotle?
Right. I'm not going to debate the guy who basically invented logic.
Yeah.
Point taken.
Exactly. And that is the problem. The moment I drop the name, your critical thinking can just switch off. You can accept the label. But what if I strip away the name?
Okay.
What if I just say to you, consider the idea that moral behavior isn't about following a strict rule book, but about navigating the midpoint between deficiency and excess.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you.
Now, you have to judge the idea on its own merit. You can't hide behind the label of Aristotle. You have to actually look at the mechanics of the argument. Does that make sense? Is it true?
It forces the listener and the speaker, I guess, to own the argument. I can't just say Locke said it. I have to be able to explain why it's true.
It strips the entire discourse of pretension. It democratizes the idea by removing the pedigree. The text argues that true philosophy doesn't care who said it, it only cares if it's true. By banning names, the text forces us to look at the mechanics, at the engineering of the argument itself.
It's like looking at a car engine without the brand logo stamped on top.
Exactly. Is it a good engine? Does it run? Does it have torque? That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Whether it's a Ferrari engine or a Ford engine, the mechanics are just physics. The text wants us to focus on the physics of the idea, not the branding.
But isn't there a risk there? I mean, if we strip away the names, don't we lose the history? Don't we lose the ability to see how these ideas evolved over time?
We might lose the simple timeline, but the text argues we gain the essence. And frankly, in an age where everyone is obsessed with branding, personal branding, corporate branding, political branding, this rule is a radical act of iconoclasm. It says, the brand is irrelevant, only the logic remains.
So we've got this high IQ, witty, nameless discourse, the anonymous philosopher. How do we actually do it then? The text has a very specific methodology. It says, flat out, you never simply summarize the text linearly.
And this is the death of the chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 style of analysis.
Which is how 99% of book reports, reviews, and, well, shows like this one usually work. First this happened, then this happened.
And the text argues that a linear summary is actually a barrier to understanding. Great ideas are rarely linear. They're web-like. They are systems. If you just recount the order of the pages, you miss the through lines.
Okay, help me understand this linear summary prohibition, because that's how I read books. You know, I start on page 1, I end on page 300. Why is summarizing that process bad?
Okay, think about the movie Titanic.
Okay, a classic.
If I gave you a linear summary, I'd say some people get on a big boat, they play poker, they dance in the basement, they draw a picture, the boat hits an iceberg, the boat sinks, the music plays, the lady throws a necklace in the ocean.
I mean, that's accurate. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it, but yeah, that's accurate.
It's technically accurate. But if that's all you know, do you understand the movie? Do you understand the themes of class warfare? Do you understand the hubris of technology versus nature? Do you understand that transition from the Edwardian era to the modern world?
No, I just know the plot. I know the sequence of events.
Exactly. The text argues that most people read philosophy like they just learned the plot of Titanic. They know the plot points. Hobbes said life is nasty, brutish, and short. Then he said we need a king. But they miss the engineering of the argument. To understand the structure, you might need to start with the sinking, the conclusion, and work backward to understand why the ship was built that way in the first place. The premise.
So the goal is synthesis, not summary.
Synthesis is the key word. The text commands the speaker to identify the premises, the logical steps, and the conclusions, regardless of where they appear in the book. You have to act like an archaeologist. You don't just describe the dirt layers in order. You dig down, you find the skeleton, you scatter the bones on the table, and then you reassemble them so we can all see the dinosaur. You have to show where the reasoning is tight and where it relies on assumptions.
That requires a lot more work from the speaker, though. You can't just read the book. You have to essentially rewrite the book in your head to understand its logical structure.
That is exactly what the +3 SD requirement is for. It takes a massive cognitive load to reassemble a complex philosophy into a coherent, nonlinear narrative. You are essentially reverse engineering the author's brain.
The text also insists on contextualization. It asks, what was the prevailing view before this work, and what specific thinkers provoked this writing?
And this is crucial. Ideas do not exist in a vacuum. I like to say that every great text is a murder weapon.
A murder weapon? That's a bit dramatic.
It's true, though. It was written to kill an old idea. No philosopher sits down and writes 500 pages just for fun. They write because they are angry. They write because they think someone else, somewhere, is fundamentally wrong. If you don't understand what the text destroyed, you don't really understand the text.
So to understand the Declaration of Independence, you have to first understand the divine right of kings.
Precisely. You have to understand that the idea of kings are chosen by God was the dominant operating system of the world for centuries. The Declaration wasn't just a nice letter. It was a dagger aimed at the heart of that entire idea.
Right.
The text demands we look at the intellectual battlefield and see who the author was fighting. We need to identify the key innovations, the new vocabulary, the new distinctions they made.
It's interesting you mentioned vocabulary. The text specifically mentions looking for new words.
Yes. Because often when a thinker encounters a problem the current language can't solve, they have to invent a word. Or they redefine an old one. You have to ask, why did the author need a new definition for justice or liberty? Usually it's because the old words were insufficient or had been corrupted.
And then once we understand the history, the murders, the battles, the text pivots to the present. It asks, so what?
Yeah.
It demands a connection to concrete situations the listener would recognize.
This is the bridge. This is what makes it relevant. If you stay in history, you're doing archaeology. If you only look at the logic, you're just doing math.
Philosophy, according to this text, must connect to life. Are there modern debates that are essentially still arguing about the same questions? If the answer is no, then the text is dead. But the answer is almost always yes.
That's the utility test.
Yeah.
The text argues that if a philosophical work doesn't help me understand why my city council is fighting or why my Twitter feed is a complete mess, then the analysis has failed. Correct. The so what factor is the ultimate test of a classic work. If it can't survive the trip to the 21st century, it should stay in the museum. The ideal discusser drags it out into the sunlight and forces it to get a job.
Now, I want to play devil's advocate here for a second. Or maybe steelman, as the text would suggest. What about criticism? The text is very clear that we aren't supposed to just worship these ideas.
No, absolutely not. The text mandates intellectual honesty. It says we must address the strongest objections fairly. And this is the steelman concept you mentioned.
Versus a straw man?
Right. A straw man is when you build a weak, silly, cartoonish version of your opponent's argument just so you can knock it down easily. Oh, my opponent hates freedom. That's a straw man.
Right.
A steel man is when you build the strongest, most robust, most intelligent version of their argument, maybe even stronger than they could build it themselves, and then you see if your position can defeat it.
That takes a lot of confidence to essentially build your enemy's best weapon for them.
It takes that +3 SD confidence. It takes the poise we talked about earlier. You have to be so sure of your analysis that you aren't afraid of the best possible counterargument. The text argues that unless you have defeated the steelman, you haven't really won the debate.
It also mentions distinguishing what the author actually argued versus what popular culture claims they argued.
This is the iconoclast aspect. We have these caricatures of famous thinkers that get passed down.
Like the Machiavelli example we used earlier.
Exactly. Everyone thinks Machiavelli was this teacher of evil, this cartoon villain. But when you apply the rigorous reading this text demands, you might find he was actually a realist, a pragmatist just trying to prevent chaos. Or, Adam Smith people think he wanted unbridled corporate greed. But if you actually read him, he's constantly warning about the dangers of merchants conspiring against the public good.
So the text demands that we rescue the author from their own fan club.
And from their haters. Yeah. We need to separate the signal from the noise of history.
Okay, I want to pivot to the part of the text that I think is the most fun, but also maybe the most revealing about the author's true intent, the thought experiments segment.
Yes. This is where the rubber really meets the road. This is where we stop analyzing and start simulating.
The text explicitly mandates that every discussion must end with outlandish but plausible thought experiments. And there are rules: scenario-based thinking, extreme but logically consistent, and, of course, the big disclaimer.
Right, for entertainment and educational purposes only.
Exactly.
That disclaimer is important because the text asks us to use scenario-based thinking to explore really extreme possibilities. It wants us to take the core logic of the philosophy and dial it all the way up to 11.
It's stress testing the idea.
Exactly. You don't know if a car is safe until you crash test it. You don't know if a philosophy is sound until you crash test it against an extreme reality. If this idea is true, what does the world look like in 100 years? What does it look like if we apply it to artificial intelligence? What does it look like on Mars?
So, in the spirit of the text we are analyzing today, let's do exactly that. Let's enter the thought experiment segment. And remember, listener, as per the text's mandate, This is for entertainment and educational purposes only.
Let's verify the framework.
Experiment number 1. Let's call this the literal interpretation protocol. Imagine a society, a real nation state that adopts the rule of this text as its supreme law for all public communication. Specifically, that rule. You do not reference provided sources directly.
Okay, so we're imagining a world where attribution is basically illegal.
Effectively, yes. In Parliament, in the news, in universities, you can share information, you can share arguments. But if you say, as John Locke once said, you go to jail, or at least you're silenced, you lose your platform.
This is profound. The immediate obvious implication is just chaos in the legal system. I mean, how do you cite precedent? Your Honor, in a previous case which shall remain nameless, a decision was made. That's an absolute nightmare.
Let's look deeper, though, at the non-obvious implication the text asks us to find. Let's play this out. It's a Tuesday morning. You're a senator in this hypothetical anonymous republic. You walk onto the floor to propose a new healthcare bill. You have, the Federalist Papers in your briefcase. You have the latest economic data from the Treasury. But you can't say Hamilton, and you can't say the Treasury Department. What do you actually say?
You're sweating. You can't use any shortcuts. You can't say, as the Heritage Foundation argues, or as the Center for American Progress suggests. You have to say, if we allocate resources via mechanism A, then historical data suggests we will see result B.
The speech becomes twice as long.
And 10 times as boring to the average voter, probably. Yeah. It becomes a lecture on pure mechanics.
But think about the news coverage that night. The pundits on TV can't attack the source. They can't say, well, of course you'd say that. That's a right-wing proposal. They have to attack the mechanism.
It instantly destroys ad hominem attacks. You can't attack the messenger if you don't know who the messenger is. The genetic fallacy, where you judge an idea based on its origin, it becomes impossible to commit.
So in the short term, you have this massive collapse of intellectual branding. Pundits, gurus, famous academics, they would lose their power instantly because all their power is tied to their name. But in the long term,
you might see the emergence of a hyper-rational meritocracy of ideas, a pure information economy. Ideas would be treated like water or air. They'd be common property. It would be a kind of collectivist hive mind of intellect.
But wait, I see a flaw, a big one.
What is it?
Accountability. If I propose a bill that completely destroys the economy and I did it anonymously or using these nameless arguments, who do we blame? Who do we fire?
That is the strongest objection. That's the steel man right there. In this world, we lose the ability to track the evolution of thought and, more importantly, the responsibility for it. If an idea turns out to be terrible, we can't punish the author. We can only punish the idea itself.
So it creates a society of high rationality, but zero accountability.
Precisely. It strips away the ego, but it also strips away the consequence. It's a trade-off. The death of the celebrity thinker in exchange for the birth of the raw idea. And frankly, looking at our current celebrity thinkers, maybe that's trade worth considering.
Experiment number 2. Let's call this the +3 STDEV governance.
I like where this is going already.
The text establishes a persona for the speaker. IQ +3 standard deviations. Witty, poised, solemn, yet playful. Let's imagine a constitutional amendment that requires this specific psychological profile for all elected officials. You cannot run for office unless you can demonstrate this specific blend of high-level synthesis, wit, and solemnity.
So we're essentially legislating the philosopher king. Plato would be thrilled.
Exactly. But does this create a utopia? Or does the text's emphasis on playful banter and outlandish thought experiments create a total disaster?
Well, if we follow the logic of the text, this government would be incredibly effective at analyzing problems.
Yeah.
They would spot the through lines of the economy instantly. They wouldn't rely on bumper sticker slogans. Campaign debates would be absolutely riveting, high level, witty, deep. Can you imagine a debate where the candidates are just playfully dismantling each other's logical fallacies while sipping wine?
It sounds great in a discussion, but...
There's a but, isn't there?
There's a big but. The text also emphasizes outlandish thought experiments. A government composed entirely of people who love to stress test ideas might start treating the actual population like a laboratory.
That's a chilling thought.
Think about it. The ideal discusser in the text is detached. They treat serious topics with poise. That's great for analysis. Is it great for a crisis? Sometimes you don't want a witty, poised analysis of why the dam just broke. You want someone to just go fix the dam.
Right.
You want someone with dirt under their fingernails, not a philosopher at a dinner party.
You're saying that the dinner party philosopher might lack the urgency of the home cook. Exactly. The text champions a detached, high-level engagement. If you fill a government with people who view reality as a text to be analyzed and synthesized, you might end up with a ruling class that is so obsessed with the structure of society that they forget the people actually living in it.
They could become paralyzed by nuance.
Paralysis by nuance. I can see the headline now. President refuses to send aid until he synthesizes the historical context of the hurricane.
We need to understand what the hurricane means before we act.
Yes, and that connects back to the criticism section we talked about. The greatest strength of the text, its rigorous demand for depth, is also its greatest weakness in a world that often requires rapid binary action. Do this or do that now.
It does. But I would argue that in our current world, we are so far in the other direction, so obsessed with speed and superficiality, that a little bit of this paralysis by nuance might actually be a good thing. I'd take a slow thinker over a fast idiot any day of the week.
That's a fair point. We could certainly use a few more philosophers at the dinner party of government.
We certainly could.
This thought experiment actually highlights the central tension of the text itself, doesn't it? Rigor is slow. Rigor is hard. And rigor is often impractical in the short term. But the text argues that without it, we are completely lost.
Okay, let's bring this home. We've analyzed the text, we've looked at the history, the methodology, the no citation rule, and we've run the simulations. So, at the end of the day, what does this all mean?
If we synthesize everything we've discussed, I think the ultimate takeaway from this work is that philosophy is not a static museum piece. It's not a book you put on a shelf to look smart. The text describes philosophy as a kind of talk radio show. It's active, it's conversational, and it requires constant friction. It demands that we don't just learn history, but that we use it.
It turns the reader into an operator. It says, here are the tools, now go build something.
And it warns us that if we don't use these tools, if we settle for the bumper sticker, if we settle for the linear summary, we are essentially surrendering our ability to understand the world around us. We become passengers in our own society. We become consumers of other people's conclusions.
I want to leave the listener with one final provocative thought, something that the text implies but doesn't explicitly say. And this is something for you to mull over on your own.
Let's hear it.
The text spends all its time defining the perfect speaker, the high IQ, the wit, the synthesis, the poise. But it says almost nothing about the listener. So if the speakers are these expert guides with the high IQs, what is the role of the listener? Are you merely the audience? Are you just sitting in the dark watching the show? Or does the text's requirement to connect to concrete situations imply that you, the person living in the real world, are the ultimate judge of truth?
That is the question, isn't it? The philosopher builds the map, but the listener is the one who has to walk the terrain.
Something to think about next time you hear a bumper sticker explanation of the world. Maybe don't buy the sticker. Thanks for listening to Talk Treatises.
Until next time.